Hello and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from the highest point on Florida State's campus and the hottest room in Seminole sports. You are listening to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State, coming to you live from room 420 inside of Diffenbaugh. Save your jokes at the door. I'm your host, Nicholas Carlisle, bringing you the latest, greatest, and Florida Statist in everything sports, or at least as much as we can fit within the hour for people all around the world. Of course, you can find us on Twitter at talk_tomahawk. Carolina is on the Twitter handle tonight. Make sure you say hello to her, and you can call into the show at 850-644-1837. Once again, that's 850-644-1837. Excuse me. Welcome to Tomahawk Talk, everybody, and just like Mike Martin, we too are going to try to get 2,000 individual wins on this show tonight.
That's a lot of wins.
Yeah, that was just an incredible thing to witness in person, wasn't it?
It really was.
It really was. So I'm sure most of you are aware it is now officially the worst time of the year, also known as daylight savings time, and it actually really messed me up this year. I'm going to be completely honest. Normally I could prepare for it. I know it's coming, but this year totally forgot about it. Woke up an hour earlier, and I haven't been so tired ever since.
I was up at 2/3 o'clock in the morning on Sunday when it happened, and that, let me tell you, that was not fun, realizing that I had an hour short. Oh, because we had to be at the... Wait, no, I'm sorry. Sunday
there was no game.
There was no game.
But
I had to be up early anyway for that.
That's a lot of fun being up for that, because it's like you time travel. You go an hour ahead of time, and it feels cool.
It's amazing what 1 hour of sleep can do to you either way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great show for you tonight. A lot to chop through. Lots of football during this show that we have to catch up on. It's kind of like that show where football just kind of comes back into things almost out of nowhere.
Does it ever really go away?
No, not really.
It's
At
always
least not for
football
me.
season.
It's always football season for me.
We're basketball school now, Nick.
We're a basketball school. That's absolutely right.
Slash baseball,
Slash
soccer, slash everything.
Everything that's not football.
Right.
Yes.
Let's get into it, everybody. What is a captain without his crew? I am joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Chris Camacho. It's a good thing that we are live radio and not live TV, because you look extremely tired.
I am exhausted, and thank you for that burn. I appreciate that. get the juices.
Hey, those were your words, not mine. You said to me, or Gary...
I said very angry. You're right. I'm exhausted, and as I mentioned with that anecdote about being up at 2/3 a.m. on Sunday, it's been a long past 2 days, that's for sure. And let me tell you, a law exam too will take it out of you. So.
Oh, a law exam.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I don't have to take that. That just kind of hurts my brain, kind of thinking about.
Listen, my hand still hurts from writing all those damn laws. It's fine.
It's
We're
weird.
good.
It's weird that we grow up writing all the time, and then we get to college. We spend so much time on our computers, and our hands physically forget how to write. And I can't write more than a page without my hand going.
Nick,
what the heck is going on? What are you doing?
The last page of my exam looks like a doctor's note. That's what we're talking about here.
Joining us tonight, the Ray Allen of the Big Three, also known as the inconsistent two-seam fastball, Gary Putnick.
Yes.
Spring training
the Marlin Boy Wonder.
Spring training is underway. How are we feeling about the hashtag NGs We Trust movement at this point?
Feeling good. Started off slow. I think they went 2-5 to start off spring, but now they're at 7-10. They play the Mets tomorrow, so that should be an easy win. Lewis Brinson's the hottest hitter in the Grapefruit League. 5 home runs. He had 2 in 1 game last week. He's hot.
That sounds about right.
Are you telling me or asking me? Because I don't.
No, I'm telling you.
Okay, good. And making his Tomahawk Talk debut tonight, Gabe Wisniewski. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you on.
Good to be here.
All right, so Chris Camacho, Gary Putnick, Gabe Wisniewski. I almost made it through that. Just a side note before I asked, Gabe his last name because he's been one of the newer members. Don't make fun of me for not knowing our members' names. He said or I asked him what his name was, and he said, "Let me spell it for you," and I knew I was screwed.
It's those Polish last names.
Yeah. Chris Camacho, Gary, Gabe Wisniewski, and once again, I'm your host, Nick Carlisle, and we are starting off the top, which if you didn't already know, is a segment where I take a look at the past week in sports, rip the top stories, and ask our panel about them, forcing them to come up with the answers off the top of their head at the top of the show. And tonight, the MLB, in the pursuit to gain a more mainstream and fast-paced type of baseball game, have announced this past weekend that the Atlantic League will be experimenting with robot umpires not
gonna say
robot
empires.
empires
Yes.
like Star Wars.
Bats will be replaced by lightsabers. We'll see how far this.
I'm sorry. In so many sidetracks early on in the show. What would Darth Vader's batting average be?
Well, I think
0.
any
He couldn't hit the ball
He'd just
because it's a
slice it in
lightsaber.
half.
because
Okay.
slice through.
Come
it,
on.
so
Okay.
it
Think
wouldn't
about
be a
it.
very effective system.
So the Atlantic League will be experimenting with robot umpires or assistant umpires that will help umpires call balls and strikes. This is one of the rumored experimental changes, as well as along with reducing the time allowed between innings, eliminating mound visits, apart from pitching changes and substitutions, and most drastically, moving back the pitching rubber a whole 2 feet in the second half of the season. Obviously, there are a lot of changes being pitched. No pun intended.
No, pun intended.
No, I
Own it,
swear,
Nick.
I swear,
Own
I
it.
swear. Pun not intended. We've got some baseball guys on the panel tonight, so I'm interested to see what you think of not only the robotic umpires, but with all these changes in general. Chris,
I hate the robot umpire. Listen,
Yes.
hate is a strong
Yes.
word.
no, yes, I
Are you
understand.
are you
the
sure?
hate
Chris.
for it.
You're just cranky?
No, maybe it is, but maybe it's showing my true colors. I hate the idea of a robot umpire in baseball. Listen, you and I were talking about this over the weekend at the baseball games. Being an umpire is one of the most thankless jobs on this earth. It's a job that nobody wants to do, but you wouldn't have the game of baseball without it. Like these guys need to be there, and it's the human element of the game. The point of the game is that there's the human error side. Like you yelling at the vitriol that these guys get, and the things that the animals of Section B were telling these umpires over the weekend is a little disgusting.
You
But-
can't write them on your logs. Sam.
no, you really cannot. But at the same time, the game of baseball needs human error, and I think if you bring robots into it, it completely eliminates that and takes away the human element to the game.
Gabe.
I'm gonna have to go the opposite direction here. I think, the more we can focus on it being the players deciding games, I think that's the better route for baseball. I think the less error you have coming from umpires, the more we focus on players actually winning the games, and just think the consistency is a better thing.
Nick, I think we just broke a record for shortest debut on the show.
Yeah,
Gave the
you're
ball
out.
right
You're
now.
out of here.
that-
I'll see my way out.
That's my
Robotic
call to make.
can robotic umpires eject people? They can't.
How would you go
I
through
don't
the
think
process?
See, you
Well,
can't. I
okay,
can't
well,
have a robotic umpire now.
There's going to. It's not like there's going to be an actual robot behind home plate.
No, I know there's not going to be anything. It's going to be they use like a stat track kind of thing to use a grid to measure the strike zone.
It's something like that.
So it's nothing is there. So how can they eject people?
No.
Yeah. Well, what are
So-
what are your thoughts on the?
I don't like the robot umpires. Don't like moving the mound back. I don't like any of these rules. Really, I'm fine with them.
well-
I'm fine with them shortening up the time between innings. That's fine by me. But pitching the mound visits, you need mound visits. You can't have it without that. You can't have baseball without it. The pitcher
Well, I
needs
don't
to
think
be.
it was too. I don't think it was affected all that much. 6 mound visits was the limit last season.
Well, no, I'm fine with that. But the way that this rule, I took a quick look at it, and it says that there's no coach initiated mound visits. I believe only to change the pitcher.
It's eliminating it completely.
Oh,
So you can't go out to your pitcher and
that.
talk to him and say, "Hey, just calm down a bit. Let's figure this out and get to the next one."
right.
There's none more of that.
I don't mind moving the mound back 2 feet. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a record in strikeouts this past season, something like that. There have been significant amount of strikeouts in the game of baseball this past season, 2018. And I think if you move the mound back, it gives hitters a better chance of seeing these guys, and it creates more hits. And if anything, obviously we're not in the steroid era anymore, so the better chance that we can give the batters to create some action. You may not get the same Cy Young performances out of some of these pitchers, but I think it'll create a little more excitement.
I'm actually not going to blame the mound for the amount of strikeouts. I'm going to blame what's been going on the hitters' end. The hitters have been trying to hit too many home runs, and they've been focusing too much on launch angle rather than making contact and trying to drive the ball in line drive fashion. That's what's caused the majority of strikeouts. It's the boomer bust swing.
When I was a kid, my mother, would come home every once in a while, and probably mostly from the grocery store. And with the advancement in technology, she would always say, or not always, but she would often comment something to the effect of, "Man, people are losing jobs, and robots are taking so much of people's jobs. Whether it's having a self checkout aisle, that you press and you scan everything yourself, and whatever have you, and digital speedometers for gauging streets and everything. this is it's kind of the same way that I feel about this. It's really not necessary, and I think it's really kind of sad. Now, I'm pretty sure the MLB isn't completely eliminating umpires. That's not what the rule is.
Right. You said
going
digitally
for.
assisted.
Digitally assisted. But I really like what you said, Chris, about the human error side of things. I think human error in sports is what makes it just naturally fun to watch.
Yes.
Seeing
Frustrating for Saints.
frustrating
Yeah.
for some, especially for Saints fans. But human error is really one of the things that make sports click. And whether that's the umpire missing a strike that should have been a strike, or whether it's a nice play and by the catcher, moving their glove on a maybe, let's say, a slider that's just on the outside edge.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much, I guess, competitiveness and things that come with human error in sports, no matter whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, whether it's football, that having that run by any form of technology would, I think, completely tamper and ruin. So I'm really not a fan. Most people, except for Gabe, but Gabe's not on the show anymore, disagree with. The other rules, I really don't agree with either. I think mound visits, are absolutely crucial to the game. Moving the mound back, I really not either way on that. Definitely am for reducing the amount of time in between innings, but with that all being said,
I think you're down for reducing the amount of innings. Period.
Yeah, let's just play one inning and go home. And with that all being said, that was the Off the Top segment, sponsored by me, brought to you by me, answered by our panel. Well, it took what seemed like forever, but Florida State has finally gotten their quarterback. Wisconsin quarterback Alex Hornibrook will be transferring into Florida State for his final year of eligibility. The Wisconsin quarterback is, he had I think he played full 4 years at Wisconsin, or
No, he had 3 years. He redshirted his freshman.
he redshirted his freshman year. The Seminoles finally have some depth at the quarterback position. That's the main thing to take out of this. But Chris, are you hashtag horny for Hornibrook? Can we say that on air?
Oh my god.
Luke,
You took away Gary's line.
Luke, can we keep
Cease and
can we
desist.
keep our hands on the phone for backlash, please? How do you
feel about
how do you
this?
feel about Hornibrook?
Listen, I think what I'm most excited about right now is the fact that Florida State has quarterback depth.
Yeah, I was actually slotted to play quarterback this next year.
Oh, were you?
They didn't find anybody.
Wow.
But go on.
No, obviously it's a concern when you only have one quarterback slated, especially with an offensive line that's been as turnstile-y as Florida State's has been. Obviously that leads a lot of concern for guys like Blackman who go down. But I think looking at the numbers for Hornibrook at Wisconsin, I think it'll be nice to have him here. My concern is the fact that he's a pro-style quarterback, and we're going to try to fit him into a Kendall Briles system, into a Willie Taggart Gulf Coast style. It's going to be a matter of whether or not he can make those adjustments. He's not very mobile, and obviously this is a very run-heavy style offense. So it's just a matter of whether or not he can make that adjustment.
Gabe?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the part about the system. I don't see him being a fantastic fit here. But even overall as a quarterback, you look at last season, only played 9 games, but 13 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, and that's far from ideal for any quarterback. So, I mean, I'm not overly thrilled with the acquisition, but obviously as a depth guy, even if he just ends up behind Blackman, that's solid to have somebody there that actually has experience.
Gary, I'm very aware of your feelings on Hornibrook, but I'm going to ask you anyway. How do you feel?
I'm excited. I think it's exactly like what both of them said, that it's great for the depth, it's great for the competition that the QB position really needs right now, because everyone coming into the first day of spring practice was asking Blackman, how's it feel to be QB1 right now? And when Hornibrook comes in later, obviously it won't be for the spring, so this spring Blackman will be QB1, but in the summer it'll be a true QB competition, and probably Blackman will most likely come out on top, but if he starts to struggle, there's always someone to step in.
Yeah, I'm going to be frankly honest. I'm not a fan of this at all. I don't like this move. It's nothing against Hornibrook. I just don't think he's a good quarterback.
You're a little
Pla-
flaccid on
Why
the
is that?
Plain and simple. That's a little bit too far. Why is that? I
Yeah.
mean, when you think about the time that he's played at Wisconsin has always kind of been in that middle tier in the top 25. Always been 10 in the 20 range. They've had fantastic defense. They've had fantastic offensive line. They've had an offensive line that has really made me blush and say, where can I get some of those guys on Florida State football teams?
Middle
And-
America.
Middle America. And, of course, you have Jonathan Taylor, a fantastic running back up there in Wisconsin. And you take all of that away. And now see what Hornibrook has at Florida State. And he has none of those things, and he was even still an average at best quarterback at Wisconsin. Average at best. I mean, in all the games that he probably could have won, and those were big games. I'm talking championship games against Ohio State. I think they played Ohio State twice and lost both times.
They lost to Penn State.
And then they lost to Penn State one of those other years. He has had the opportunity to really show that he has what it takes to be a quarterback at the next level, or even really a solid quarterback at the collegiate level, and he has not done it. He has failed in every single attempt, and I don't see how that would change here at Florida State, considering that the running game wasn't that great this past year. The offensive line is probably the worst in the country, or was the worst in the country. I think this is going to be a gigantic flop, if I'm completely honest with you. But the only silver lining, and that's something that you all already said, is that, hey, at least Florida State has somebody else to put on their depth chart that we get in the press box before the game, because...
We have another J.J. Costantine.
Whoa,
okay, hold on.
Don't
hold on,
say that.
Hold on.
That's
on.
me. That's me.
Hold on.
That's me.
I don't like
Don't do
Hornibrook,
Hornibrook like that.
but don't
That's
do
harsh.
my man like that. I don't really see it working out. And especially then the main thing for me, and I'll spread around the mic in a second, is that it's just the offensive line. You know, Wisconsin has such a great defense and a great offensive line, and he was just average, as I've already said, and now you're taking that away. And I don't think he's going to be anything special, Gary.
Well, I mean, any quarterback that you put behind a bad offensive line is going to be bad, plain and simple, unless it's, I don't know who, maybe Aaron Rodgers, even then I don't even know. But I still think he's got some potential, and I think he doesn't have the biggest arm, which I think is a blessing in disguise, really, because he doesn't need to throw the ball that long in this kind of offense. He needs to be able to get short, quick passes out and just march the ball up the field quickly, and that's something you don't need to do with long passes and a big arm.
Yeah, but do you agree with that?
I agree that the arm strength isn't a huge deal in this system, and you look at the body type. You got a 6'4", 219 guy, so he's going to be durable. He's going to be tough, but I mean, as a quarterback, I don't see him as anything especially talented. Like, there's just not a whole lot that jumps off to me when I watch him play. So,
Do you think Florida State's settling?
Oh, I absolutely think they're settling.
Settling?
Absolutely.
Who else would they be getting right now?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that I don't think that Florida State went all out in recruiting some of the bigger name quarterbacks that came up on the market in the transfer portal this year. Talk about the Justin Fields of the world. Talk about the Jalen Hurts of the world.
Well,
now,
you're
I am trying to, in essence, try to fit a square into a circular hole when it comes of, hey, you also have to come and want to play for Florida State.
Exactly.
That's part of the picture. But
you lose a recruit too, like Sam Howell.
And Sam Howell, and then Bailey Hawkman leaving at the beginning of last season too. I guess at the core root of everything, I'm extremely disappointed. Anything to add, Chris?
To that? No, I mean, I think you've summed it up just about. I think you've summed it up the best way possible.
The best way possible. Well, thank you. That's why you're my co-host. And also, Gabe is back on the show for agreeing with me.
Nice.
And I'm off the show.
And you're off the show permanently. Well, it took, speaking of taking a long time, it took Florida State a long time to get a number 2 quarterback or number 1 quarterback, of course. We'll see. Siri, you are not allowed to be on the show either. Sebastian, in editing, please. That's become my favorite thing, is to reference Sebastian in the booth. I don't know.
This is still a live show.
Florida State softball and baseball, both undefeated to start the season. Florida State baseball actually had a very similar start to the season last season, won 14 straight. This year they won 11 straight before eventually losing their first game. Florida State baseball won lost the first game in a shutout, almost a no-hitter. But Florida State softball actually suffered 2 losses this past weekend. The dynasty is over, ladies. I'm just kidding. Absolutely
Call
not.
it quits.
Tank.
Tank for a prospect pick. Softball, I believe they were in Arizona
Correct.
this past weekend. There's obviously some jet lag to go with that. And Chris, I'm sure nothing has really changed about your perspective of this softball team, but it's good to get these losses out of the way, don't you think?
I would agree. I think there's a lot of pressure for any undefeated team in any undefeated sport. There's always that anticipation. When is that going to come? Both softball and baseball have had their scares. But like you said, it's good to just get this one out of the way. And that's the thing with the sport like baseball and softball is just losses are going to happen. No baseball or softball team is going to have an undefeated season. So this is just a casual loss. It happens. With the loss against GCU, their first loss of the season, they lost, what was it? It was 6-. They lost by 1 run, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it? I thought it was like 6-3 or
Gary, get on that?
Yep.
Okay, well, either way, they lost. The very next game, they run-ruled GCU. It's
a game-to-game sport.
Yes, exactly. Losses are bound to happen. I'm not at all concerned.
No, I feel like I have the need to ask everybody, especially people that don't appear on the panel very often. But Gabe, what are your general impressions about the softball team thus far this season? How do you feel? About what they've been able to do thus far?
I mean, the first word that comes to mind is dominant. And just even top 10 teams, you see them go out and just control a game from start to finish. You brought up that loss to Arizona. It's the number 12 team in the country, and they still went on the road and took 2 of 3. Just the team as a whole, I mean, you look at Megan King, the way she dominates out there. Anybody is a threat to hit a homer at any point. It's just top to bottom, clearly the best team in the country.
Now, I'm not trying to forecast anything, Gary, but I mean, the one thing that, and I said this, I believe, last week as well, the one thing that you can knock against the Florida State softball team is that they haven't played enough at home. But, when they get back home eventually, what do you see a nice streak developing? Do you think they're going to kind of maintain this pace that they've been that they've gotten over the past couple of weeks?
I think they're going to go on a nice little streak when they come back. When they come back on March 15th, they play Notre Dame in a 3-game set, FAMU for 1 game, and then UNF, and then they host NC State, for another 3-game set. So I think realistically they'll probably lose one of those games due to fatigue, just to normal grind of the season. So, but I think they'll play well for the majority of that time because they all you guys have been saying, they're just a solid ball club.
Well, and also the ACC isn't a top-notch softball.
Yeah, it's not the SEC.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's
not the SEC.
It's not the
Yeah,
I thought you said it's like the SEC.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
No, and so they'll on this 8-game homestand, they're playing 2 ACC teams 6 different times. I can definitely see a streak developing there. FAMU's a great, because obviously you got 2 Tallahassee schools coming in. Always a fun game to be at. And then UNF, Florida State baseball actually played UNF this past week. I'm not sure how their softball team is, but yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course, and I say this every week, but it's like, well, Florida State in softball, literally, they've just been so dominant. We could, sit here and repeat the same things about how good they are every single week, but I wish that I could spend more time on them. But I think obviously the biggest story coming out of this weekend was Mike Martin's 2000th win as skipper for the Florida State Seminoles, making him the winningest coach in any collegiate sport in history. Chris, just when you hear that stat, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Legendary. Absolutely legendary. And well, I wrote an Instagram post to kind of commemorate my time, that moment this past Saturday, and I like this little the way that I kind of summed it up was, in essence, is that Mike Martin's legacy is bigger than his huge heart will let you believe. Is because you look at a guy like Mike Martin, you have a conversation with him, and you would have no idea that this guy is a complete and total, I can't say that word, sorry. He's just he's legendary in essence, and just all the things that he's been able to accomplish and still maintain such a level ego, I think is it's fantastic. I'm super happy for him.
And really, just like the first thing that you noticed when the post game press conference was really one of the first things he said was he just went and he thanked the media and the fans. Mm-hmm. And I think I think there was a difference when he was talking about it, because there's a difference between knowing what you have to say and then saying it from the heart. And I think that's really the difference with Mike Martin and the type of legacy that he's left on Florida State, is that everything has been heartfelt. Nothing has been taken at face value. Everything literally has just come from the heart. So we are actually about halfway through the show. That's actually a pretty good stopping point right there. Of course, we're going to talk more about the weekend series against Virginia Tech. Florida State's been playing a lot of Virginia Tech recently. A lot of Virginia Tech and potentially more Virginia Tech in the future. So we are going to take a quick 90-second break. When we get back, Emma Clausen will give us the time-honored tradition, the Seminole segment. So make sure that you come back in 90 seconds with us. You are listening to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State.
Daytime, blueberry knees feeling just fine, yeah. Break up down in the backyard, this simple season's all ours, yeah.
Number four, Florida State beach volleyball attends UCLA's East Meets West competition this weekend. I'm Emma Clausen with Segment segment. Florida State beat number 3 Pepperdine 4-1 and number 5 Hawaii in a close 3-2 match that came down to a tiebreaker set. The 2 wins this weekend bring FSU to 7 top 10 wins so far this season. FSU's win over Pepperdine is only the second in program history. Both teams have been coached under Coach Brooke Nile. Along with this being the second win against Pepperdine, it's also the highest scoring win. The win over Hawaii was the 3rd consecutive win of that day and the 8th win against Hawaii in program history. The last time the Noles beat Hawaii was in the NCAA semifinals. The 3 teams competing in the East Meets West Invitational were the teams the Noles had defeated previously on their way to the team's 3rd national runner-up title in 2018. FSU took down USC in the first round, UCLA in the second, and Hawaii in the semifinals to meet the Bruins again in the finals. FSU led the series against Hawaii and UCLA. LSU, FIU, and TCU joined the Seminoles to represent the East in the CCSA in Manhattan Beach this weekend. The Noles will be home this upcoming weekend. The Noles will be home March 16th for Alumni Weekend and for the Garnet and Gold Scrimmage. In track news, in Birmingham, Alabama this weekend, the 10th-ranked Seminoles men rose up to grab and share 6th place Saturday at the Crossplex. The Noles scored 24 points on the way to their best finishing place since 2014 when they placed 4th. By sharing 6th place with the top-ranked Texas Tech, FSU authored the 7th best finish in program history with their 8th highest points total at the meet. James grabbed silver for the men's in the 200-meter dash, and Trey Cunningham was the 60-meter hurdle bronze medalist. James seeded 3rd entering the final, was slow out of the blocks, and he never recovered, and he finished 8th. Cunningham was the first to receive his award. Out quick from the blocks in the middle of the track, Cunningham was unable to remain clean after the barriers. He finished 3rd with a 7.64 in the hurdles. Along with Cunningham and James, accomplishment freshman Brian Richard made his NCAA debut. Brian duped NCAA me and was really impressive, Coach Branham said. He went toe-to-toe with some of the Nationals' best sprinters and ran right to his lifetime best on both days. Richard is the first freshman to make the finalists since Walter Dixon 2005. He finished one place higher. Richard, running indoor for the first time this season, had trouble grasping the significance of his performance on a larger scale. I'm Emma Klossman's segment. Now back to Tomahawk Talk.
Thank you, Emma, for the time-honored tradition here at WVFS Tallahassee, the Seminole segment. Welcome back to Tomahawk Talk, everybody. The second half of the show is underway. On the other side of the break, we gave you a little taste of our thoughts about the legendary, as Chris put it, the legendary Mark Martin and his legacy here at Florida State. But now, on to the actual series, and what a series it was. It was really a really good test for Florida State. Whether, you thought Virginia Tech was anything special or not, Virginia Tech played their absolute hearts out and really, obviously they almost had a no-hitter against Florida State on the first game of the doubleheader on Saturday, but they really brought it to this baseball team and gave them a nice test when really they haven't had that many tests thus far this season. But just taking a look at the Friday matchup, the Friday matchup and the Saturday matchup were both extremely similar in how they formulated. Florida State found themselves down by a couple of runs. Gary, what did Florida State show you with these two games and how they were able to claw back, at least in the first game?
They showed that they can they can just come together later in those innings when they need it, and they don't get down. Like, you see it a lot with some other teams that whenever they get down, they get in those slumps, whether it be for a game or multiple games. They just can't get out of it going into the later halves of games when they need it. But they struggled a couple times. I believe in that game where they walked it off on Friday night, they had 2 times where they left the bases loaded. And most times I've seen teams just give up at that point. But they stuck to it, and they actually ended up winning the ball game.
Gabe, J.C. Flowers in his first 2 seasons at Florida State had a little bit of an inconsistent time at the plate. And, of course, he started off the season, both those seasons, very hot at the plate, and then he cooled off drastically. And, talk about the weekend that he had. He had the walk-off on Friday night, and then in the second game of the doubleheader on Saturday, he scored, I believe, 1 run prior to his 8th inning at-bat where he launched a home run over the right field wall. What's so impressive about J.C. Flowers and what he's been able to do this time around?
Just see him as such a calm guy in the clutch moments of games. You see it whether he's at the plate or even on the mound. He's been really good. A guy that can really settle his teammates down, get the big hits when they need them, at least put the ball in play when he needs to do that. It's just the way that he comes up in the biggest moments is what seemed to impress me the most.
I think that's so funny that you mentioned he's calm, because I think that's a great way to describe him. I think because, as a media member, obviously you want to get as many quotes as you possibly can. J.C. Flowers will
not give you those
quotes.
Will
not give you
Impossible.
those quotes because he'll sum it up in one sentence. But I was there for the game on Friday and at the press conference. Obviously, J.C. Flowers has this huge hit. The walk-off hit on Friday. Goes into the press conference, sits there with his arms crossed as if nothing had just happened, gives the most nonchalant responses. Calm, cool, and collected is the best way to describe J.C. Flowers.
And of course, he had a fantastic outing on the mound. And I don't know if he pitched on Friday, but I know he pitched.
He pitched on Wednesday.
He pitched on Wednesday, and he's been able to get a couple of very, very solid outings. Gary, what does his ability to close do for this baseball team?
It proves the people. It proves the people at Perfect Game right, because this is the high school prospect system that a lot of baseball players go through. And I got his Perfect Game profile up right now. In 2016, when he graduated, he finished as the number 1 right-handed pitcher in Florida in the state rankings and number 13 in the nation. So he had potential going out of high school to be a solid pitcher. He could have just gone and straight up been a pitcher right out of high school, and he would have been fine. But he decided to challenge himself and play outfield. That's probably what he loved to do more, but he's proven a lot of people right with what he's doing on the mound right now.
Gabe, everybody knew that Martin was going to reach the milestone at some point this season, and if he didn't reach that milestone, something in his own words he said would be very, very wrong. What now that this milestone has been reached, do you think that it's going to lift some pressure off of these players, if there was really any pressure at all? Saying, well, now the milestone is hit. Now we can focus on getting to Omaha, which is what Drew Mendoza said is the ultimate goal.
I think you can definitely tell that. When you think about looking ahead to this season, it had to be in every guy's head. How many wins do we need at this point? After every one, I'm sure some of them were crossing it off, getting closer and closer. Now that that's passed, there's no big number milestone to look ahead to this season. So it's back to just playing baseball and trying to win games and, go and win a championship.
And speaking of winning games, there is a big game tomorrow night. Florida State heading down to Gainesville to Hogtown to face the Florida Gators in a one-off game. Chris, Florida State has not had the best luck down in Gainesville by any means.
They were swept last year?
I believe they were swept in
yeah.
season. Had a season sweep. Obviously, every single team is different. And how do you think that this year's team is going to handle going down to Gainesville?
Well, there's something that I've seen out of this team, and it's drive. And especially this past weekend series, as we mentioned, they're not playing against Youngstown State. They're not playing against Maine anymore. These are some decent teams, and I think looking at they now have 3 walk-off wins over the season. I think seeing that level of competitiveness, that ability to stay in the game, because baseball is really a game that's played above the shoulders. It's about staying in the game mentally and seeing that mental drive that these players have. That mental longevity. I keep saying mental, but it's true. There's a lot of brain power that comes into it, and that ability to stay in it against a top 10 team like Florida. That's going to go a long way. Will they get a season sweep of Florida? Probably not, but I think they have a better chance than they did last year.
So Shane Drohan got the I guess it formerly known as the Sunday start, but the second start of the doubleheader on Saturday. He had 6 strikeouts, if I remember correctly, but he threw a lot of pitches. Does that performance swing you either way into whether that Sunday starter role is still going to be his come this next weekend series against NC State?
I think it's still up for grabs, honestly. Knowing Mike Martin, he's willing to make a change whether it's for the good of the team or not. So I think if Drohan doesn't keep performing, if he doesn't get those strikeouts up, if he's still giving up runs, he's going to get the boot, and it's probably going to be Pollock coming in. But Pollock isn't doing as much to make his claim either for the Sunday role, so it's kind of just sitting in neutral right now.
And, of course, C.J. Van Eyck had a shaky start on the first game of Saturday as well. So, clearly, I mean, as good as we've praised this Florida State baseball team for being there, still quite a lot to do when it comes to starting pitching. The bullpen has been more or less fantastic. Not necessarily as concerned about that. But, Gabe, if you had to just take a guess, how do you see tomorrow night going for Florida State?
I mean, I think the main thing is how do they start. You look at the Virginia Tech series. In all 3 games, they had some issues with control early on with their starting pitchers, but then they settled in with some of their relievers. I saw Jonas Scalaro in Win 2000 was fantastic in the bullpen. So I think, getting those come from behind wins against a team like Florida is obviously very difficult. So I think if they can get off to a better start on the mound than they've been having, I think there's a very good chance for them to get a win.
For me, the key is really strikeouts for this baseball team at this point. I remember sitting next to Gary in the doubleheader series, and we literally were just counting up the strikeouts that Florida State was having. And it's really going to be, how do the young Florida State batters handle a pitching staff with the quality of University of Florida? And I think that's going to be the key. That is going to be what is going to be most interesting to talk about when we do get around to talking about it. But
over the weekend series, what was the total strikeout count?
I don't know the total weekend series, but the whole week, including the game against UNF, it was 56.
56.
And you know what they had coming into that week?
What's up?
66.
Yikes.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a big yikes.
Almost doubled it.
Almost doubled it.
In 108 innings. That's how many innings are in 4 games. I'm sorry. Yeah, so 108 outs.
Subtract 2.
108
Subtract
outs.
2 innings
108
out.
outs. They struck out 56 times. You said?
Yes.
So more than half of their outs came from strikeouts.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
No.
Put it that way.
Definitely something to look forward and see how they tackle that. But moving on to basketball, they kind of get the short end of the stick this week. First with women's, they beat Duke, I believe, I think it was on Saturday. If
No, I believe it was Friday.
Was it
actually.
Friday?
It was Friday, yeah, Friday the win against Duke.
Either way, everybody on the panel last week saw them probably making it to the quarterfinals and facing off against an NC State, and then it got a little bit divided as to where this team would end up against NC State, and they did lose to NC State 62-69. Of course, you do remember Florida State did beat NC State earlier in the season, and I think that was one of their come from behind victories that was really, really impressive. And you know what the saying is about revenge games. You cannot take the team, or you cannot not take the team coming in, with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and
Unless it's Florida State.
Unless it's Florida State. And of course, the Wolfpack did come in and they were able to nab this one from Florida State. Obviously, the season isn't over at this point, Chris. Of course, there is still the big dance for women's basketball, but is this about what you expected in terms of the ACC championships for Florida State?
Oh, definitely. No, I think, well, actually, I had Florida State beating NC State. But, I mean, it's expected. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the stat sheet from against NC State. They actually didn't have any points on second. They didn't have any second chance points. We're once again beaten out in the paint. Valencia Myers actually had a bit of an off game, so that was a little unusual to see. But this is a young team's first chance in a big postseason tournament. I don't think we really could have expected all that much more, even had they beaten NC State.
And of course, Gabe, with this team, we've said it over and over again. What do you think this? Or I'm not going to call it an early exit. I'm going to probably say that it's an exit at about the right time. What do you think that this team can learn from this exit against NC State when it comes to the NCAA tournament?
I think any kind of experience at this point is huge because we're talking about a team that from last season replaced all 5 of its starters. Our only team in the top 25 to do that. So to get a loss in the ACC tournament, it's not as big a deal, obviously. NCAA tournament, that's the end of the line. So to get some experience was good, to just learn from it and continue to grow.
Gary?
Yeah, I think this was, like you guys saying, this was the right exit for them. They are still a young team. They still got a lot of injuries with them. So I think you could really expect the same going into the NCAA. Like, if they win one game, that's great. And anything after that's just playing with house money.
Play with house money. Switching off to the men, they don't know who they play yet, but looking at how the bracket is currently fixated, number 12 Miami faces Wake Forest in Game 1 on noon, and that is tomorrow at noon. And then the winner of that game will face off against Virginia Tech, and then the winner of that game will face Florida State. Of course, Florida State has the double bye, and that game, whoever Florida State will be facing, is at 2:30 p.m. on March 14th. That is the Thursday. So, Chris, it looks like, at least by how the seating is right now, that Florida State is going to be facing Virginia Tech in another sport again. Just enough of Virginia Tech already. Just, of course, kidding. How do you see this rematch? I mean, that Virginia Tech game is still very close to the mind.
Sure. No. And it's funny because we're talking about revenge games here. Big revenge game for Virginia Tech, and I consider I got to say that it was a sad fact, but the Virginia Tech game was my first and last FSU men's basketball game.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I know.
You're a baseball guy.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
no.
Still,
okay. Wait. No.
Still
It was
4 years.
wait. Okay. No. I'm sorry. I should say for this season.
Oh.
For this season.
Okay.
Oh my
Okay,
God.
jeez,
Okay.
man.
No.
I was about to say.
First and last
I was like,
basketball game
that's impossible for
of
you to go 4 years.
2018-19. No. Absolutely not. But regardless, it was still a great first and last game for the 2018-19 season.
Yeah.
For Florida State to only score 19 points in the first half and then to come back and win it in the fashion that they did, that you talk about a chip on your shoulders. Virginia Tech that's almost an embarrassing loss. So I think to see the way that the game was played out on the court, there was a lot of push, a lot of back and forth. Trent Forrest mentioned earlier that there was a lot of chirping on that court.
Grayson Allen 3.0.
So it'll just be interesting. I'm really excited to see how the bad blood will play out in the ACC tournament.
And, of course, the winner of that game will more than likely go on to face Virginia in the semifinal game Speaking of semifinal games, it's really a shame that North Carolina and Duke only get to meet in the semifinals. Because I feel like, especially with how North Carolina has beaten Duke twice now, that's definitely a game I would be wanting to watch. But Gabe, how do you see? I'm just gonna say that they're going to face Virginia Tech, but I don't think there's any real doubt here that Wake Forest or Miami are going to beat Virginia Tech. But
Wake's playing good
Wake's
basketball
making
right now.
waves.
Wake
Interesting.
is playing good basketball. That I mean I do pick Wake to beat Miami in that first round game. But how do you see Florida State performing in a potential rematch with Virginia Tech?
I think if they bring their heads with them early on, they'll be fine. Like you talked about how heated that game was. There's a lot of energy in that. There's definitely going to be Virginia Tech coming in with a chip on their shoulder. And I think if Florida State allows them to get out to a lead like that again, Virginia Tech's not going to give it back to them. So if they can come out early, find their rhythm, and just play their solid brand of basketball, they'll be fine. But if they play the first half the way they did at home, it's not going to be the same result.
Gary?
I think it's going to be a lot more like the second half of that game against Virginia Tech and Tallahassee, because in the first half, Florida State just could not find a way to get inside the paint. For the whole time, they were just dribbling around the three-point line and chucking up a shot with 3 seconds left. It felt rushed when it got to that point, and I think they figured it out in the second half. Obviously, they were able to get more buckets down low. They were able to get, what was his name? What's his name got fouled out for Virginia Tech?
Blackshear.
Blackshear got fouled out, so that helped a lot with getting Cabangeli some points down low. So I think it's all about points in the paint this week.
Hill ended up fouling out too as well. But and I can't believe that this has slipped my mind until now. Fiano Cabangeli has been named the ACC Sixth Man of the Year. So congratulations are in order to Fee. Well deserved, absolutely. And that leads to my next question, Chris. I mean, how big is he going to have to show up, or how big is he going to have to play?
It's a big man that's going to have to play a big role on this team. That is for sure. Of course, you don't want to lean on one guy, and it's funny that he was named Sixth Man of the Year, because really he felt like a member of that starting
he's a
five.
sixth starter. Let's be honest. I mean,
No,
maybe that is
100%.
what the Sixth Man of the Year is technically supposed to be, but definitely was a starter. I mean,
right. And so I think coming into this, finding a way to get those points in the paint, and Cabangeli's a fantastic free throw shooter too. So I think being able to utilize him strategically, especially against, if Florida State's able to play a Virginia, I think making sure to get those points and utilizing him to the best in the best interest of Florida State, I think that'll go a long way.
Do you guys find it ironic? I believe I looked at the first, second, and third teams for all ACC teams. Did I miss Cabangeli in there, or was he?
For the all ACC team.
Because I'm pretty sure I didn't see him on first, second, or third team. And how do you get
that's a good
my
question.
problem is, how do you get named Sixth Man of the Year and not make it on one
Gary,
of
I'm
those?
pretty sure you're tripping. I'm pretty sure you're tripping.
Are you on Bing?
We'll see. We'll come back to that. Or
find
maybe
it.
we're starting to get into the Twilight Zone. 7 minutes left in the show.
It's okay. We have fun.
We do. Well, we have so much fun. The big thing for Florida State is really just not getting off to a bad start. I mean, 19 points in the first half against Virginia Tech is pitiful. I believe. Hold on, let me see here against Wake Forest. I think they had 21. So not much better.
He was not on first, second, or third team.
Really?
Not on first, second, or third.
Wow.
Yep.
That's extremely surprising.
That's
and
why I was confused.
And not only
Sixth man?
we are. I mean, obviously, we're not biased, on the show, but I mean, even as a Florida State person, that's kind of just a head scratcher, just knowing what he has done for this basketball team, and how really people have come around to admire Fiondu and what he's been able to do for the basketball team. That's extremely surprising. Wow.
Yeah.
I really
Just a head scratcher, right?
I
there.
honestly don't know what to say to that.
I did want to comment on your. So yes, I agree. Florida State can't get off to a bad start, but I think there's something that all Florida State sports teams have in common.
It's
At least
getting off
that's
to a bad start.
It's getting off to a bad start, especially if you're looking at 2013 through 2015-16 Florida State football. Those second half comebacks were I mean, those are ones for the record books. It's Florida State tends to have. Well, I'm sorry. Florida State has a tendency to get off to a slow start, but then pick it up in the second half. Obviously, it's preferable that they don't start off on the wrong foot, but I'm not entirely worried if they do, depending on how bad a start we're talking, of course.
So just before we get into the 5-minute Twilight Zone mark, just quickly, question for everybody: how far is Florida State going in the ACC championships?
They'll win. They'll beat Virginia Tech if they play Virginia Tech, or regardless who they play, and then they lose to UVA.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm gonna say against a Virginia team whose defense has just been stout all year long. I think that's gonna be a tough team to get some points against.
Gabe?
I feel the same, but I do want to see them at least put up a better fight against Virginia than the first game. That was quite ugly.
I think actually Florida State is going to lose that game against Virginia Tech. I think that loss for Virginia Tech was just so monumental and so really, I think it probably shouldn't have happened. I think Virginia Tech is going to come out with a vengeance, and I think that Florida State is going to lose that game. But that's going to set themselves up for some more practice to get into the actual NCAA tournament, and I think that's going to be beneficial for them.
Gary, I think this is the shortest tenure for a host on Tomahawk Talk. Thanks for joining us.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
well,
no, I think that's a valid point.
It's a bold take.
It's
a bold take.
Thank you for that.
So, as promised at the beginning of the show, we have about 4 minutes left. It's been a wild weekend in the NFL. The Antonio Brown saga finally over. Antonio Brown becoming a member of the Oakland Raiders, being traded by the Steelers to Oakland for a 3rd-round pick and a 5th-round pick in this year's draft. And Brown has a new contract, I think, of $30 million, 33. I think it's 30.
Wait.
I think it's 30.
Are you for Antonio Brown?
Oh, Antonio Brown.
I thought I saw 54.
Well, it's 30 guaranteed.
Oh, 30 guaranteed.
30 guaranteed.
Yes.
Chris, what are your thoughts on the end to the saga? Did the Steelers win? Did Brown win? And did the Steelers get back enough for a player like Antonio Brown?
You're talking to the MLB guy? This is what?
Yeah, I trust you.
You trust me?
Steelers lose, Chris.
Oh
That's
my
the answer.
God.
Absolutely.
Steelers lose,
Thank
Brown
you.
wins,
Steelers-
Raiders win.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're entering an age in sports now where you're seeing that free agents are starting to come out on top. The longer they stay out of it, I think the truer they stick to their guns, the bigger payout they get, the more that they win. So I would agree. Antonio Brown wins this, and the Steelers ultimately get the short end of the stick. I'm a little worried for the payroll for Oakland or Las Vegas, whatever they're going to be next year. But,
Just remember, Antonio Brown wasn't a free agent.
Yeah.
Oh,
He was not a free agent. A lot of people
Thank you.
forgot that.
We'll see. That's he did a good job acting like one.
Yes, exactly. He made everyone think he was a free agent by the way he acted. He tricked all of you guys.
Gabe, how do you feel about the saga?
I definitely feel like Oakland won this trade. To get a 3rd and a 5th for the best receiver in football is just, I don't know, didn't seem like a great deal for Pittsburgh, but I guess at the same time they had to get something because I don't think he was planning on playing it down for them this upcoming season. So at least they got something for him.
Gary?
I agree. The Steelers kind of got the short end of the stick, but also the Steelers do pretty well when it comes to mid-round picks. So I think they know what they're doing in that regard, but the Raiders are stacking up for when they get to Vegas. They got, 3 first-round picks coming up, a 2nd round or a 3rd, and they got Antonio Brown. So they got the big-name guy, and they got some young guys coming up for a small payroll.
I cannot believe that the Steelers traded Antonio Brown and did not get at least a 1st-round pick in next year's draft. Or a draft in the future, just a 1st-round pick in general. I mean, Oakland has 2 first-round picks in this year's draft, and you cannot even get maybe the 24 spot. You cannot get that draft pick for a player like Antonio Brown. Steelers definitely lost this war between themselves and Antonio Brown. It was a very interesting situation. It's been a very interesting year for the Steelers organization in general. And just quickly before the show, since we got a minute left, I mean, there's been a ton of free agent signings. And, of course, these aren't official. These are, Gary, I don't know how you worded it to me earlier.
The new year begins Thursday.
The new year begins Thursday. So there is still some time to go back on some signings if certain players are getting second opinions and feelings about the teams that they've signed with. But just around the table, just really quick, what's your best signing? What's your best and most surprising signing?
Landon Collins to the Redskins.
Landon Collins to the Redskins.
That was big for them.
Why do you think that?
They need help.
They need
just
help.
need help. Put it that way. He's a good guy. He's a good player, and they need help.
Gabe, how about you?
I actually like Deshaun Jackson going back to Philadelphia. I mean, I know he's a little bit old. But I mean, he still gets his job done, which is 2 catches for 90 yards a game. That's really what you're getting out of him. And in an offense that needs a deep threat, maybe that'll solve a problem for him.
Chris?
Gabe stole mine. He stole my generic one that I could have used and passed off as my own.
Well,
But-
okay, well, here, let me save you. Tyrann Mathieu, Houston Texans, he just signed, I believe, a brand new deal, and this happened like 30 minutes ago. He signed a new deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, so imagine a secondary with Mathieu and Eric Berry.
There you go.
Does that work for you?
That
They
works
got
for
better.
me. That's-
Okay.
I'm glad I gave you that note there, Nick.
Yeah,
Thank you for
well,
that.
thank you, ESPN,
Yeah.
for bailing Chris out once again. For me, I think Eric Weddle to the Rams is a fantastic move. The Rams have done a fantastic job this offseason of managing their money and being able to keep the players that they need to. I'm not quite sure about the Dante Fowler Jr. signing. I didn't think he did that much for the linebacker core for the LA Rams, but Eric Weddle is definitely a nice asset to go in and help a Rams defense that started off the year really hot but just ended up being average. So that is about all the time we have left in the show. Just want to say quickly, happy birthday to my grandmother. I've been withholding calling all day just so I could shout you on the show. Love you, Grandma. Love you very, very much. And also, just very, very quickly, we are going to have a 2-hour show. And we'll let you know more about it on the social media, so definitely make sure you're following those. Again, on Twitter, it's talk_Tomahawk. We are having a 2-hour show on the 25th. It's going to be a March Madness special and a whole bunch of other things, so make sure that you tune into that. New release is up next. Thank you all so much for listening. For Chris, for Nick, for Gabe, for Gary, you're listening to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State.